Well, I think the comments made by Vice President Biden suggest that he hasn't been well or accurately briefed on the dependence of the American economy on Canadian energy exports. Uh, it's a hugely important strategic development for the United States that North America is now energy independent, no longer dependent on imports from OPEC dictatorships like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. That is both in the economic and national security interests of the United States, and it's in part because of increased Canadian energy shipments to the United States, particularly from Alberta heavy crude. About over the past decade, many of the American oil refineries retooled at a cost of tens of billions of dollars in order to process heavy crude. And they have turned increasingly to Alberta to fill that demand as the United States has imposed sanctions on the other major source of heavy oil in the Western Hemisphere, which is Venezuela. I think that's a good thing for the United States. And in particular, Mr. Biden today made comments about the Keystone pipeline. Well, the Keystone pipeline began operating a decade ago, and it delivers about 600,000 barrels a day of heavy Alberta crude to refineries primarily in the Midwest in Illinois. So a whole lot of jobs and the economy in the American Midwest are dependent on that supply of energy through the Keystone pipeline. And so we would hope to have a chance to ensure that Mr. Biden is aware of these facts and also aware that the Building Trades Union, the construction unions, the steelworkers unions, which are traditional supporters of Mr. Biden's party, are strongly in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline expansion, which has already crossed the border, which is creating thousands of jobs on both sides of the border, and which will ensure that the United States is no longer dependent on OPEC crude. He also said something about the Canadian heavy oil industry being not well, first of all, he said that Keystone was not economically viable. In fact, as I said, it's been operating for 10 years. Profitably and successfully, both for the refineries, American consumers, and Canadian producers. Keystone XL is obviously economically viable because the shippers have signed up for long-term contracts to ensure that, and the refineries in the U.S. are desperate for the product. He also said that it was that Keystone, and I'm going to assume he meant here Keystone XL, was not environmentally responsible, but in fact, two reports conducted by the U.S. State Department under the leadership of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and President Barack Obama concluded that Keystone XL would actually reduce CO2 emissions because shipping oil by pipeline means substantially lower emissions than the alternative, which is shipping it by rail. So one way or another, the American economy needs this energy. It will either get it from the socialist dictatorship and OPEC state Venezuela, or from the American ally and democratic free market economy of Alberta. And either it will be shipped from Alberta to U.S. refineries by rail with higher carbon emissions, or safely by pipe with lower carbon emissions. And finally, if I had a chance, I would point out to Mr. Biden that the California heavy crude, including oil that's generated by a lot of his campaign donors in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles, has a much higher carbon profile than Alberta heavy crude. So again, I think that we're going to look forward to an opportunity over the months to come to ensure that the Vice President is aware of these facts.